Okay, let's get started. Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Writers Education Committee for hosting. I'm Hilary Swett. I'm a librarian and archivist at the Writers Guild Foundation. I've been here for 6 years and have learned some things about writers' papers that I would like to share with you today. I'm going to go over a lot of information, and I hope there's something for everyone and your unique needs and situation. I'm going to go through the presentation and hopefully hit all of the things you might be wondering about. There will be a handout at the end, and there's time set aside for questions and discussion as well. So one of my main responsibilities is going through scripts and manuscript collections that have been donated over the years and continue to be donated. If you've ever been into our library or the members lounge, you've seen the walls lined with scripts and glass cases. Between our on-site and off-site spaces, we have almost 40,000 film, TV, and radio scripts cataloged and waiting to be read. But what you can't see are the over 150 archival collections spanning many, many boxes of produced and unproduced scripts and correspondence, memos, research, outlines, sometimes photos, publicity material, call sheets, all the stuff that makes up a screenwriter's professional life. So right now, I just want to put up a quick poll on screen for a minute, just to get a sense of where everybody's at in your own quest for organization and control of your life. So there should be 3 questions, and it'll be interesting to see how everybody feels about it. Okay, Greg, can you share the results if everybody's done? Mid-career, paper and digital files, 79% paper and digital files. That's what people are interested in. So of course, that's what we all have. And 58%, half of you say it's stable but disorganized and you need help. So that's why we're here. That's good to know. So our main focus today is practical advice, but before that, I'd like to introduce what's at the foundation of archival work, as it may help your process when it comes time to actually sit down in front of your stuff. There are many definitions and senses of the word archive, and it's used a lot these days. And unless you're a user of archives in the historical academic sense, it's a word that's a bit vague. So an archive can be files on a flash drive or papers stacked on a desk or in a filing cabinet, can be. And it can be stuff in disarray in the garage or put away in a giant iconic warehouse somewhere. These things are part of your archive, but there's more to it than that. So I like this simple definition. It's an institution or individual's entire body of interrelated and interdependent records preserved because of their continuing value. So there's a few key ideas here. An entire body of work, which we call your collection, is different from a library, which houses discrete published items of standard formats by different authors. Archival papers are interrelated. They provide context to each other as a unit. The collection is preserved, meaning it's stored properly with metadata or some kind of information about what it is, and it has continuing value for you or your kids or an institution like the WGF. So value can be monetary, legal, or evidentiary, administrative, and in our case, cultural. So these are the major points I'm going to talk about today. I'll share with you what I've learned about how to organize and keep track of all your stuff, your life on paper and now in digital form, and how to care for it long term. Hopefully, in demystifying the process, you will feel more empowered and motivated to tackle your own records, your professional legacy. I'm going to focus on professional writing output and scripts, obviously, but the principles and ideas I'm talking about can be applied to projects like family history and genealogy, something in your personal life, hobbies, whatever makes up your life and who you are. So first I'll talk about paper and then move into the digital realm. And I want to stress up front and throughout that figuring out what works for you is better than figuring out something that has to be perfect. So why might you want to tackle this project in the first place? What are your goals? I recognize that practical things like space management in your home might be nagging at you to get started. And there's also an emotional component that keeps you from getting started. The most common reason to undertake this project is because you're getting older and thinking about your future. Maybe you want to downsize your home. Maybe you want to pass along your legacy to your kids. Maybe you'd like to even eventually donate your papers to our archive or your university, something like that. So you can keep files for people like me who find them interesting later, and for historians who write books and articles. Scholars like to see ideas and pilots and unproduced projects that are a part of someone's history just as much as the final product. And it's not just academic people. Sometimes I get emails from people who are working on their family history and they know that their great aunt so-and-so was a member of the Writers Guild and they'd like to know more about her. Do I have any records or information or stories I can share? I'm always happy when I can help them. Also, in some of our donations, there are records from WGA or former WGA board and committee members documenting the work that they've been involved in. So meeting minutes and correspondence, stuff like that. And this stems from former WGA presidents on down. So these are valuable in my work of telling the Guild's story. So it can be hard to think about a project like this and not think about its implications and personal meaning for you. So acknowledge that and wait until you're ready, and know that much like exercise or retirement planning, doing anything is better than doing nothing. I know we don't go through life thinking about the paraphernalia of our lives with posterity in mind, but you are the keeper of your records and files, and you are in the best position to know what everything is. So you're in the position to take action. So to begin, make sure that you have the time and the bandwidth, depending on what you want to tackle, a filing cabinet or a shed or whatever. Know that it will take longer than you want it to, and probably more than a few weekends. Have a clean space set aside, have room to spread out on a table that you can keep full. You don't necessarily want to clean up every time you stop working for a day. It takes time because you're making decisions along the way. It's also an emotional process. Memories come up, and I'm just as guilty as the next person of looking for something or trying to organize one thing and taking a walk down memory lane. But it's important to stay focused. So survey, take stock of what and where your stuff is. Do you have boxes and closets in your office, at home and work, a garage, a storage unit, your parents' house? Then there's hard drives in these places. There's files in the cloud. There's photo albums, social media. I mean, it's a lot these days. I usually have multiple boxes I'm working on of paper simultaneously, and I keep them physically near each other to make the process more efficient. So at this point, maybe start a Word document of project titles and years and categorizing if you work in different arenas. When I start working on a collection, I have an idea of what the writer's major projects are and what I might find. And I have an idea of what researchers might find valuable because I've been doing this a while. Especially valuable are manuscripts or other items that exist only in one or two places, like on your hard drive. So think about those things. And if you're toward the end of your career, you know the highlights and you know what's important. And if you're not, you can keep that in the back of your mind as you go along. So this is what my pandemic home office is filled with. These are some boxes and papers from the family of a feature writer named Bill Lancaster. He passed away in 1997. You can see one box on the left is labeled Bill's various scripts, which is the dreaded miscellaneous box that archivists encounter. And if you have an abundance of miscellaneous files, now is a great opportunity to rectify the situation sooner rather than later. You may have a filing cabinet of paper, or you may have a digital file structure, or both. Either way, your stuff is probably filed under the title names of projects or ideas. And these are the records of your work that we're going to start with. It's a good place to start. So I want to give you a little perspective on how to think about this work. Marie Kondo, who's the Japanese personal organizing guru, was everywhere a few years ago. Her book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, was a hit, and she got a Netflix show. Her concept is simple and totally doable. She instructs you to clump your belongings together by category and choose to keep only those things that spark joy. If something doesn't make you happy, she gives you permission to let it go. It served its purpose and you move on. And she applies this to kitchen gadgets and clothes and books and mementos and everything that you might have in your house. So this message can be amended with an archival perspective. The idea that idea you've been kicking around for 10 years may spark joy, or maybe it doesn't. But either way, is it something you want to save long-term? Why do you value your own material? And is there context for it? Who might be interested in the future? How do you think it might be used by your family or by people in the future? So this process, this thinking through process in my world is called appraisal. It's a series of choices and decision-making about what to keep and what to toss. You go through everything, making piles, organizing, start big and drill down, and determine your big categories first. So you have to dive in somewhere, and alphabetical order is a good way to do it. So clump like items together, meaning everything related to one project should be together as much as possible. Sometimes it's just one file folder for one project, and that's easy, or it might be a produced film that has many, many drafts, of course, and outlines and correspondence and a call sheet and all that other stuff that you collect. So selecting and weeding are an important part of this process. It's okay to throw stuff away within reason. In our collections, I encounter lots of copies of one draft, a bunch of photocopies that never got mailed out, for example. You don't need 10 photocopies of the same thing or every receipt or notepad necessarily, and it's kind of up to you to decide, well, everything. You cannot, and you do not have to save everything. Stuff takes up space, which is finite. So you do have to make decisions. And I want to mention the importance of physical and intellectual control. We instinctively understand that actual organization and storage of your stuff is important, and we kind of understand how to do it. But so is the associated metadata or information that you create about your stuff. So these are two separate interrelated activities and should be done concurrently if possible. So you can start an inventory in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can be as simple or granular as you want. In my work, I record the title and author's name and draft date and draft stage And I record what's in the folder, if it's a screenplay or if it's a treatment. So this might be more info than you want to capture, but making any kind of a list is helpful either to you or your family or a future archivist like me. So I'm going to just give you some bit more practical tips. Assess the existing folder and box labels and put temporary labels on boxes and piles as you go. If you use Post-it notes, remove them after because the adhesive can mess with the ink on the paper. Dates are really important in my work, so consider adding date or year in the folder or spreadsheet if it's not evident on the item. Work with one container or one group or one project at a time so you don't get too overwhelmed or mix things up. Use your smartphone to your advantage. Take photos if you need for reference of how things were labeled or organized. If you want to throw something out, but you still kind of want a reference for it, just take a picture. If you want, you could potentially recycle stuff that can be found online, like old newspapers or trade papers, keeping the ones that are specialty that you want to keep. There's a concept in archives called original order. If certain papers or files were together, then keep them together, unless it's totally a weird thing or a mistake. You may want to keep envelopes with the documents themselves, as they may provide info on the sender or the recipient or the date. But keep the paper out of the envelope and keep it flat so you don't have to open it more than one time. Long-term, fasteners tend to rust and damage or tear the paper unless they are kept in good condition, as you can see in these photographs. They also add unnecessary bulk to a folder. So it's at this point that I usually take the time to get rid of brads and paper clips, binder clips, rubber bands, and other things. Maybe staples if they're falling apart or causing trouble with the paper, but only carefully and if you're not going to do more damage. If something should definitely stay together that's not obvious, like a script is obvious because it has a beginning and an end, I think I might mix something up, or it's like a tiny scrap of paper or something. You can take a piece of paper and just fold it in half and use that to denote that those things go together. So this image is from the files of Bill Lancaster. You can see the rust. It hasn't affected the content, of course. You can still read the script, but it's not ideal. In the other picture, the brads broke apart because of the degradation of the metal. And you can see the staining on the paper around where the brads were. And I'll talk about that stuff a little bit later. And the last practical tip is take breaks. Just as you have to step away from your writing, you have to let any project simmer for a while. So this is an abstraction of what might be, oh, let me make sure I'm on the right slide. This is an abstraction of what might be the intellectual organization of what you end up with. You can see it goes from bigger groupings at the top to smaller, and that's just the mental model of how your stuff might look. And you go from this bunch of piles to this, the physical and intellectual result of your effort. And it's all nice and neat, mostly neat. So as things are organized in piles, what do you do with it as you go along? I'll talk about folders, containers, products you can buy, special supplies needed, and long-term storage. Ultimately, you can spend as much money as you want, but you don't have to. And don't let a lack of supplies and tools be a barrier. There's so many products out there, and I'll try and present options or just tell you what's out there so you can, so you can feel empowered to make your own decisions. So the biggest thing is you've probably heard the term acid-free. You see retailers use this term for labels and folders and paper and boxes. It refers to the fact that paper is acidic. Over time, the aging process results in yellowed and brittle paper, which is that old paper look that we all see. Acid-free products are manufactured to have a neutral pH. Paper production has advanced enough during the 20th century, 20th and 21st century. And now paper is pretty high quality, unlike the pulp paperback of years past, and those paperbacks that would turn yellow quickly because it was just lower quality paper. So acid migration is when a paper or folder leaches acid onto the adjoining piece, like a news clipping will turn the paper behind it brown, or a manila folder that turns yellow over time. In the same way, in the same idea as acid-free, products can also be labeled lignin-free. Lignin is an organic substance found in wood pulp and is also acidic and causes yellowing. So this isn't neither of these is a super high concern unless you've got really old stuff or newsprint in your papers. Archives buy special acid-free folders and boxes. And of course, this is more money than what you would buy at an office supply store. You probably don't really need to do that unless your goal is really for long-term, like more than 10 years, in which case you might want to invest. And unless a folder is in bad shape and just kind of falling apart and gross, you can leave your stuff in whatever folder you put it in. Although I always start fresh just because we're doing it with a long-term goal in mind. So, and it's nice to have a fresh folder. This image is from one of our collections where you can see that the newspaper that was lying on top of it browned the edges of the kind of yellowish paper. So when you're buying supplies, the word archival is used a lot. So just make sure that the product specifies acid-free and lignin-free if that's what you are aiming for. I have a few more practical considerations. There's a special tissue paper or interleaving paper, it's called. You can buy, it's also acid-free. It can be used to separate items inside a folder or protect the emulsion of a photo or wrap up an artifact. It's pretty useful overall and just kind of good to have around. The idea of white cotton gloves is a nice image, but it is not necessary. You can wear them when working with photos or film, or in the case of Blade Runner, dystopian future data records, to prevent finger smudges and scratches. Otherwise, they lessen your dexterity and are not needed, especially for our modern paper. There is one thing that I've encountered that isn't stable, which I know some of you probably have in your filing cabinets, is that old kind of shiny thermal fax paper from the 80s and 90s. Just like receipts, these are sensitive to light and heat and may contain impermanent dyes, and as a result, the text is likely to fade over time and become illegible, or the whole surface may darken, which makes it, unreadable and unusable. You can photocopy or scan these if you have them and want to save them. It's up to you how you want to handle trade paper and newspaper clippings. It might depend on how much you've got. The Variety and Hollywood Reporter physical object is very stable long-term. I've got really old ones in our archive and they stayed looking nice, although that stuff is online, but you have to pay for it. So it's kind of up to you if you want to keep those or not. And newspapers, of course, many have been digitized and the acid does leach out onto other stuff. So you can put it in its own folder or a sleeve or an envelope or something just to keep it separate. Photos are a bit of a special case. If you don't care about seeing the photo, you can buy acid-free white photo envelopes. If you want to actually see the photo or some other special piece of paper that you don't want to handle, there's a few options. Mylar is a glass clear polyester enclosure that protects and reduces handling of the actual item. Polypropylene and polyethylene are similar materials They're less clear, but they're still transparent and they're cheaper, so you can go with those. And I'll have more information in the handout. This is a lot. Another note about photos, there's a mark of acceptability for photo preservation. You'll see PAT on the supply websites. It means the product passed the photographic activity test, which is a simulated aging of the storage container in question. So you know that it's a high quality container. With photos, write on the back lightly with a pencil if you have to write on it. And actually write on everything with a pencil because there's a lot of erasing, and I do a lot of erasing. So that's just a general tip. So with things in folders, now we move on to containers. So there's many different kinds of boxes and containers. The box acts as a barrier between the environment and the stuff inside. And that's the way to think about it. So it's best for any container to be packed well. Items that are crammed together risk being damaged. Similarly, leaving tons of space in a box can cause the paper to fold and bend at strange angles. So think about the size, how much other stuff is around it, what the container is made of. Tightly closed plastic bins, for example, can trap moisture and gases inside, and especially causing photographs to stick together. So plastic is a fine short-term thing, but it's not a preservation, long-term preservation. So what does get the most use is something you probably all have in your garages, which is a cardboard records box from an office supply store. There are acid-free versions that you can buy also. You want to stand the folders upright and maximize space. So this goes either if you're doing letter or legal sized inside the box. There's a box that I had on the previous slide called a Hollinger box. Sorry, a Hollinger box. It's a box where the folders stand upright about half the size of a records box, and it has a hinged lid. And there are boxes you can buy that accommodate slides and photos and negatives and records, vinyl records, CDs and DVDs, small artifacts. There's like, if you can have it and collect it, there's a box for it. So, so just know you can spend any amount of money you want to spend. There's also just plain flat boxes for laying papers or other items flat inside, and it just sits on a shelf then. And you can use these for weirdly sized or oversized things like posters or framed stuff or index cards, which have a habit of getting lost. So for all of these supplies, there's a few main suppliers, which I'll link to. There's a company called Gaylord, a company called Hollinger, just to name a few. They're all good quality, and the products are all pretty equivalent, so you can do some price comparison shopping. You can see the wear and tear on this box of the Thing scripts. That was also from Bill Lancaster. The tape on the outside left that brown stain on the box after the adhesive deteriorated. On the inside were many drafts of the script, including many that had taped revisions before copy and paste. You can see it in the upper left and in the middle right. So the tape is in good shape, even though these are 40 years old. So the box was the barrier between the external environment and the paper, and it did its job, and it kind of took a beating, but what was on the inside is okay. So now I'll talk about where. You've got your neat stuff in folders and boxes, and you have some kind of document that says what everything is. So the last thing to figure out is, where is it all going to live? How and where do you store everything? This is going to vary a lot on a lot of things, the formats that you've got, the environmental conditions that you live in, how much money you're willing to spend. All of your materials should ideally be stored in cool, clean, low light, temperature stable environment. And I'll talk about what that means. The museum world has developed a list called the 10 agents of deterioration. And these are used by institutional people like myself to in facilities planning and conservation, but they are applicable to your own personal collection as well and provide a context that we can look at right now. So the first agent is physical force, which just means something breaks or tears, it's positioned poorly, it gets damaged from an earthquake. So you can do what you can to prevent that from happening. Next are fire, water, pests, and pollutants like cleaning chemicals. These are self-explanatory. With fire, smoke damage can be worse than a small fire that doesn't even come near it. Pipe leaks are the most common source of water damage, but it could also just refer to you spilling a glass of water. So for this reason, material should be at least 4 inches off the ground if you can, if there's a risk of water leakage or like a pipe overhead or something. Light damage is caused by overexposure to natural or artificial light. So definitely don't keep something for an extended amount of time in sunlight or even in incandescent light. Temperature and humidity that are too low or too high can damage stuff based on the material type. So it's important to keep your stuff out of basements and attics where the biggest fluctuations can occur. Low relative humidity causes drying and cracking, and high humidity encourages mold growth. Rapidly fluctuating humidity causes structural damage as the material expands and contracts. So it's best to attempt to keep temperatures between 65 degrees and 72 degrees Fahrenheit and relative humidity between 35% and 55%. This all sounds pretty normal. Modern HVAC systems in the home keep the environment stable, of course, and thermostats can tell you what the humidity is. Living right near the ocean is fun, but it's not great for stuff to be outside then because of all that moisture and the salt in the air. So that's why things should be kept inside the home. And the final 2 agents of deterioration are not environmental, but people-centered. So neglect is the loss of an artifact or information associated with the artifact. Here it's called dissociation, such as names or dates or locations. And then finally, theft and vandalism, which hopefully is not an issue for you, but museums have to think about that kind of thing. So I've introduced these 10 ideas to provide an idea of how things should be stored overall. I've encountered in our collections mold spots, foxing, water damage, curled paper, acid leaching out from a paper or newspaper, and definitely a lot of rust from brads and paper clips. None of this is a disaster, of course. It's all the content is fine. And on a practical level, you don't have to worry about fixing any of these things. Mostly you just have to try to prevent damage. So do the best you can with what you have. Maintain control over the climate. If something is damaged beyond repair or you really want help with it, there's professional conservators and people who specialize in all sorts of objects, art and otherwise. And of course, I'm talking about 20th century and 21st century paper. Old paper certainly needs more careful handling and storing, but for our purposes, scripts are very sturdy. So film and videotape and audio tape present other challenges, and there's a lot of information online, both in preserving and accessing the content on the media. In general, magnetic media like VHS should be stored at cooler temperatures between 32 and 61, with a relative humidity between 30 and 50%, so a little bit cooler and a little bit drier. The tape should be wound to one end, stored vertically on end. Film needs to be stored even colder, below 46 degrees, moving image film. Modern film is made on a polyester base, but older film called safety or acetate film can degrade and a vinegar smell comes off of it. And if you've ever been around old films, you know that smell. And then nitrate film, which was the earliest film in use, is the combustible film that is part of Hollywood lore. Optical media, CDs and DVDs, also are subject to temperature and humidity swings. And all media is subject to the same agents of deterioration as paper, in particular dust and scratches, and CDs and DVDs get warped. So there's lots of things that can affect our stuff. The most common damage that happens is from water. There's resources on the handout, but essentially in my world, you want to dry the item as quickly as possible and create airflow. And if you can't do that right away, you freeze it, and I'll explain why. So if a book or a folder of papers gets wet, you want to lay it out, maybe in the sun if it's hot and dry out, and have fans to blow air around. And with books, you stand them up vertically and interleave paper towels every 20 or so pages to absorb the water and replace the paper towels. But if you really there's a lot of stuff wet, and you can't do it all right away, then the biggest hazard is mold growth. So you stick stuff in the freezer until you can thaw it, and then deal with the condensation afterwards. So in addition to environmental hazards, audiovisual media and digital files are at the most risk from neglect because they are machine readable. The way the information is recorded, stored, and accessed means that you need a machine to get to the content, unlike a piece of paper, which just needs your eyes. So you need a VCR or a computer with the right software to even know what something is. Which leads me into the final section, which is digital file management, and a little bit about digitization as well. If you're like me, digital file management causes a vague cloud of anxiety and paralysis. I'm a digital native, and I long for the analog days that I knew in my childhood. Managing your digital life is more work than managing your paper life, and I'll try and dispel some of that anxiety. The principles that I've talked about this evening apply, but this could be a whole hour in and of itself, so bear with me as I go through some details. So digital media has changed rapidly over the past few decades, as we know, compared to pre-digital technology of writing that's been around for thousands of years. Dealing with your digital stuff is taxing because you have to open files and stare at the screen for a long time. It's so much more to sift through, and less progress is felt. But the way to do it is the same as you would do for paper. You just kind of have to look at everything, or mostly everything, decide what to keep, and organize in a way that makes sense to you. Digital files are more fragile and transient and subject to loss because they require that machine to access. So in the world, we as a society, we don't even know for sure how long digital storage is going to last because we haven't experienced that yet. Paper and writing really is a great preservation medium for long term, so don't discount the value of paper. Maybe you already print out a final draft of your work when you're done for safety, and that's a good idea. Don't get rid of those paper drafts. Digging in a bit, I'll talk a little bit more. Files are affected by obsolescence. So do you regularly migrate files to newer versions? If you ever updated your operating system and then had programs that aren't compatible, then that's a loss. If you've ever accidentally deleted something or had a hard drive failure, that's a loss. Have you literally lost a file because you have so much stuff and you can't find something? I know that that's happened to me. There's also something called bit rot or data rot, where the actual individual bits get changed or corrupted, which can change a file permanently. So the way to preserve digital items is similar to paper and other analog material. You're going to organize it in folders using consistent naming and folder hierarchy that you create, proper storage, which means backups, and have adequate metadata about your files. So first, you have to locate all of your files. They live on your computer, but also on external drives and your phone, and photos that live on social media accounts. If you're old enough, there was zip drives and jazz drives. Your digital life has a lot of threads that we probably don't even remember or realize. So decide what you want to actively keep and begin to organize, taking advantage of folder hierarchies. And as with analog material, selection is important so you don't waste time and space keeping stuff that you ultimately don't want to keep. So I'm assuming that your professional work is organized already by title of project. This is how I encounter many collections. So file names should be obvious and consistent and descriptive. Figure out what works for you. Your projects could be organized in alphabetical order. You should include the year in the file name using the 4-digit year and 2-digit month and day. You can include project type. Is it draft 1? Is it revisions? Is it a treatment? What is it? Is it a brainstorm document? Using underscore marks instead of spaces creates a better reading and sorting experience. And remember that the first character in any file name can be sorted, so doing alphabetical order makes sense. And good file naming is better for you as well as your reps and producers who have to have contact with your work. And if you are looking at older stuff, it's best not to save documents after you open them, because this will change the modified or the created date, and that's a property of the file that may be valuable to you down the line, or to your family, or to me, somebody like me. During this process, you could make a spreadsheet or a Word document with title and description, maybe the file name and the digital location, perhaps the physical location of the drive. If something was scanned, and then maybe add a year. If you have a lot of the same project with the same title and file name, you remember you can always rename as a batch too. This is a functionality that's built into Windows and the Mac operating system to be very, it's very useful when you have many, many versions of something. So once you've gotten organized, you want to keep this stuff safe. It's a more active process than just leaving a bin in the closet. And there's what you should do and what you can do, as with all of this stuff I'm talking about. So there's 3 facets to digital storage. The first is redundancy. There's an acronym called LOCKS. It stands for lots of copies, keep stuff safe. Pretty simple. That just means have backups. There's also something called the 3-2-1 rule. You have 3 copies of a file, 2 on different types of storage media, so your computer and an external drive, for example, and 1 copy offsite, so in the cloud, could be 1, or a hard drive that's kept in a different location that's not your home. This is done for if a disaster strikes, for example, there's geographic separation. So the cloud is good to store things, although services are not in perpetuity. We don't ever know how long anything is going to last. And it costs money, of course, that you may or may not want to spend. It's good practice to change out storage media every 5 to 7 years, which probably happens anyway as your hardware ages and you run out of space. So, and everything is in the cloud now anyway, although this is not a complete solution. It's one tool. It should be one tool in your toolbox. The second component of file management is migration, and I'll mention some file formats as well. If you have a file in an old format, you need to convert it to the newer version of the software. This is what migration is. Or if a piece of software doesn't exist anymore, you have more work to do to figure out how to open an old file, if you can at all. The Library of Congress and other digital preservation thinkers have their preferred formats. For text, PDFs are totally fine. It's a proprietary format from Adobe, but it's all so ubiquitous at this point. And as you know, it makes the file unchangeable and retains all the formatting regardless of the user or what system they're using. So it's a good long-term format. For images, high resolution, 600 DPI dots per inch, TIFF files, TIFF, are what archivists use, and JPEG 2000 as well. And TIFF and JPEG 2000 are lossless formats. JPEG is also a good format and standard, but it's more compressed, so it loses some of the data. And but TIFFs have better data, but they're bigger files, so there's more for you to store. So it's kind of up to you how you want to do that. For audio, WAV files are the preferred format, and it's the same deal where the larger file takes up more storage. And for video, QuickTime and AVI formats are acceptable. So things do change, formats get improved over time, things change. This area of preservation kind of has constant research, or like every 10 years, 5 or 10 years, something new happens. So if you're curious, there are resources out there, and there's lots of information about this subdiscipline. So I won't go into too much detail, but there's also a lot of information online about digitization, both of paper and AV material. In general, if you're scanning paper or photos, a flatbed is best because then it can't mangle or tear the paper. You use your discretion. A sheet feeder like copy machine is fine too, if it's good quality paper and there's no staples or anything. There are consumer tools to digitize at home, videotape and an audio tape, VHS, for example. You do need something to play it on and a capture device that plugs into your computer via USB, and you're basically playing back the recording and hitting record on the computer, just like doing tape dubs back in the day. So there are places that do it too, including Costco, and there's some places around the country that handle much older media. So there's options. And even the Notes app on the iPhone has a scan function if you just need an image, and it doesn't have to be anything special. So if you have a lot of stuff, or you just don't have the bandwidth, you'll probably want to outsource to a vendor and do, let them take care of the time-consuming part. Or you can, figure it out on your own. The file formats apply, and I'll reiterate that paper is a great storage medium, so there's no pressure to digitize. If you do, try and keep originals, because ultimately original files are great to have in addition to digital surrogates. Definitely do not, or you definitely don't have to keep CDs and DVDs and things like, well, floppy disks or USB flash drives. These are access and storage tools, or access and transfer tools, that are not meant for long-term. They are meant for short-term transfer of content between two systems, and they're not a long-term preservation medium. So the third component of good digital file management is metadata, which then represents the access and the management of files without having to open them to know what they are. So you already have a list of your physical stuff, so you can just add your digital stuff in with that, particularly where in physical space some drives might be, and like passwords and links and stuff like that that you need long-term. I'll end this section just by mentioning email. Other than your completed and delivered work itself, your email probably contains the most information about you and your work. And this is, there's a lot of research happening in this area. It's complicated. Email clients have tools to save emails, although sometimes the attachments are not saved alongside the email. So you kind of have to investigate and be aware of what the setup is with your email client, or with when you're downloading messages. Losing emails to server trouble or through neglect is something I think that we'll all have to deal with at some point, potentially. Accessing and keyword searching and creating data about someone's emails are going to really unlock our digital lives in the future. Nobody can sift through all of someone's email account like you can sift through a filing cabinet. So we're reliant on computers to do some of the work for us. Again, it's that machine doing the work instead of our eyes. We've come to the end. We've toured through what you might have and what you might want to do with it. I know there's questions. I know it was a lot of information, so I hope you feel more prepared to tackle your legacy. As I said in the beginning, it's really up to you how much you want to put into it, or if you have a kind soul or a spouse to help you, even better. You just do what you can and you take it in increments. And often I step away from a project for days or maybe even weeks, just because there's only so much that your brain can handle at one time. So I just want to put up the last poll question, Greg, if you could do that, to gauge how everybody is feeling now. Hopefully you're feeling better. Okay. What are the results? Oh, the next year or two, 64%. That is, that's higher than I was expecting, I think. Okay. So I'll just, I'll wrap things up with a few more things. What happens when you're done with all of this work? I'll just mention a bit more about the WGF. People get in touch with me about donating to our archive, and I tell them about how we work, and together we plan logistics, and they transfer the physical collection to the WGF. Sometimes people get in touch and then end up saying they're not ready and they'll figure it out later, which is totally understandable. And then 3 or 5 years later, they are ready. I never know what's going to happen with people, but I work with all kinds of people. And once I do get a collection, I then go through this process that I've talked about and inventory and create a collection description. And depending on how much stuff there is and what kind of shape it's in, my effort varies, and I have many hats to wear. So it's just kind of always an ongoing thing for me. So if you are interested in something like that, get in touch. You will get an email at the end of this with some useful links to websites and some of the things I've mentioned. There's a lot of information out there, but hopefully they're more helpful and not too scary or full of too much jargon. And if you want more information, me and the rest of the WGF staff are always available on email. Our website is wgfoundation.org. and my email is hswett@wgfoundation.org. So you can visit our website and peruse the library and archive area to see the wealth and variety of material that we have and what writers we have collections for. We help with research and point you toward other websites and libraries to check out, really anything. And that's it. Thank you all for attending. And it's time to answer some questions. I'm sure there will be some good ones and some ones that other people want to know about.
Hey, everybody. So I'm going to start with a question from Hannah. Do you think there's any benefit to having past screenplays professionally bound, or would it only serve a nostalgic purpose?
Oh, that's a great question. We do that in our library, and it's a way that we honor award-nominated screenwriters. I will say that, like, in the library world, when things are bound, then you have to unbind it if you want to scan it. And I mean, if it's not already digital, then that's like more of an issue, because you have to figure out, am I going to scan this thing and have a digital copy of it, or is it just going to remain paper? I think that's a personal, just if you want to see it on your bookshelves. It's up to you.
Next, we have an question from Anonymous, rather. If you have an obsolete 1-inch broadcast tape or zip disks and no tech to run it, are there places that offer updating for these things?
So there's so like I said, you can basically buy a little converter box for $30 on Amazon that you could do it at home. There's definitely places in LA that do transfers for a fee. And so it's, I'm trying to think of who we've used in our library. Again, it's kind of just, like reviews on price comparison shopping. They'll give you a quote to do stuff. It depends on, if you do have a lot, then you don't want to do it yourself. But if it's just one thing, well, you don't want to buy a VCR. So I think they do one-offs too. Vendors around LA will do a one-off.
So email Hilary for
email me and I'll recommend somebody.
The next question is from Devra. How do you save your entire email cabinet to your computer? You used to be able to do this with old AOL before everything went online. Once saved, some can't be opened if you aren't using the old program. Any advice?
I probably have advice, but I don't know off the top of my head. There used to be something, I don't even know if that's the case anymore, where there was something called an mBox that you could create, and that was your file archive. I haven't done it recently, and I don't know. I know there's third-party tools that you can pay for to do it for you. And I don't know if you can do it like from Gmail automatically in one fell swoop, or you have to save individual messages. So you can email me and I can probably answer pretty quickly once I find out.
And we have a question from David. I have one of those small waterproof, fireproof strong boxes to store backup hard drives, important paper and files, etc. Any risks to that?
No, I was going to mention it, but I must have taken it out. A fireproof safe is a good thing to have also. Those are, I mean, as one of your preservation tools in your toolbox, for sure. Those are good. Those are good things to have.
Excellent. Well, if anyone has any last minute questions, drop them in the Q&A. Otherwise, that was it.
Maybe I answered everyone's questions.
All right. I think that may be the last question.
Cool. I'm glad it was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That was great.
My pleasure.